I Zoom. Oh, got it.
Well, it's 3:03. I think we'll get started now. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad you joined us today. This is the Professional Development Seminar Series from the Graduate School. My name is Mary Wood. I'm a program director in the Graduate School. Today's presentation is entitled Finding Common Ground in Disagreement, Managing Conflict. And our session is led by Dr. Loraleigh Keashly from Wayne State's Department of Communication. In addition to her research and faculty role, Dr. Keashly is the Associate Dean for Curriculum and Student Affairs in the College of Fine, Performing, and Communication Arts. And as you can surmise, her research, teaching, and consulting focus on conflict and conflict resolution at the interpersonal, group, intergroup, and organizational level. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Keashly.
Hi, thanks, Mary, and welcome, everybody. I'm happy to be here with you, and I think we're going to be talking about some stuff that's probably very relevant to you. Just a couple of kind of housekeeping kinds of things. This PowerPoint will become available to you afterwards, and I will augment the notes pages with materials. And there's all sorts of resources. Plus, I've got a couple of follow-up documents that I thought you might like to have, tips for managing conflict. So I thought that would be helpful. The other thing is that Mary is going to monitor the chat for me. I do have it up, but she'll also help keep me on track. And the other way she's going to help keep me on track is to give me some time clicks. So she'll give it to me at 3:15, 3:30, 3:45, so that I know to stay on task. Now, having said all of that, you have questions, you want something expanded. I mean, I've designed something here, but if something really grabs you and you want to know more information, flag it, and Mary will let me know, and then we can spend some time talking about it. Again, you're going to have the entire PowerPoint, so even if we only get partway through, you still get all the good stuff. So let me give you an idea about what I had planned for today. And first of all, I have to get my thing working here. We'll talk about what is conflict. I'm going to share with you a model of responding. I think it's always neat to have a little acronym to help remind you of all the things that might be involved. We'll talk a little bit about sources of conflict. I'll overview some of the core skills, and you will likely find that you have a lot of these skills. You've just never thought of putting them together or being aware of how they fit with managing conflict. And if we get time, I'll talk a little bit about how you can prevent conflict, unnecessary conflict, because there is a lot of conflict that we don't want to prevent, that it has a lot of value. It raises concerns and issues like that. So Mary, would you put in the chat for me? We're doing a Mentimeter, and so I would like the students to have access to that. If you could put that in the chat for folks, it means you're going to go to menti.com and there's a code. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over here. So I can now.
It's in the chat, Loraleigh.
Okay, thanks. So everybody, if you would take just a couple of moments, it's like, think about when do you consider yourself in conflict? Like, how do you know you're in a conflict? What are your signs that tell you that you are in a conflict? And if you could just throw a few thoughts down, and then it's going to pop up on the screen. And sharing a dual screen will be a little challenging. So you're going to have to trust me on this one, that I'll report what people have put in there. And remember, it's anonymous, so I can't tell. So one of your signs is you don't know the answer to a question. So it starts to have you wonder, if I don't know the answer now, am I in trouble? Is this a problem? Is this going to be a difficult conversation? Come on, others of you, I know you have thoughts and feelings about conflict. Anybody having trouble accessing it? When people act differently around me. Oh, so you see a change in interaction, a behavior. Okay, lack of compromise. So people don't seem to be being willing to go back and forth and have a conversation. People, you feeling frustrated, and you see other people looking frustrated. Okay, these are some of the cues that you're using that say, hey, there's something going on here, and it could possibly be a conflict. Anybody else? I know there's more than 4 of you here, so let's go for another minute. Throw some stuff in there, folks. You know, if it helps you at all, what kind of image comes to your mind when you think about being in conflict? What's the predominant feeling for you when you think about being in conflict? Sometimes when others do not communicate the same as before, this is somebody's comment. Yeah, they've changed the way they're talking to you. Maybe they're stopped talking to you altogether, or they're being really clipped. We don't agree. So when there's a point in the conversation where people are in disagreement, that for you is you know, for the person who posted, that's potentially one of those flags that we could be going into some conflictual territory. Anything else? Oh, change in body language. Yeah, absolutely. Right. They may go, the other person may go from being very relaxed to, you know, and people have talked about expression. You may also find it in your own body. You find yourself, your muscles getting tight, your breathing getting shallow. It's cueing you. Anybody else? All right, going, gone. All right. Okay. So let's work with some of that. I mean, what you came up with is what we know. So here's 3 ways that we like to think about it, the different kinds of domains in which it shows up. First of all is our perceptions, what's going on. So, come on now. If people talked about that, there was a lack of compromise, or it seemed like we disagreed, or in our conversation, I realized what they wanted and what I wanted were different. And so if our perception is that we have those differences, and sometimes we actually don't, but if our perception is that we have those differences, that's often one of the cues, right? Another is the feeling level. Somebody mentioned feeling frustrated. So any kind of emotional reaction that signifies disagreement. Sometimes people feel sad in that moment. Sometimes they feel angry. Those can all be cues about that, bitter, hopeless. And then the other is more inaction oriented, and people talked about that. What people do to express their feelings, perceptions, and get their needs met in a way that has the potential to interfere with others. So somebody's behavior has changed. People talked about that too when they posted in the Mentimeter, said people's behavior has changed towards me. It looks like we're in opposition to each other. So these are all the different ways that it tends to focus up. And when we're managing conflict, we need to kind of keep this in mind about our own reactions, but also what's happening for other people. And it's by dealing with all of these things, we may be able to get clear about our perceptions, that our values or interests may well be in disagreement. There are ways that we can address it in a way that satisfies it. But we also know that part of conflict is often a feeling associated with it. So one of my experiences in helping people work with conflict is I need to recognize that sometimes the feelings, even after we've resolved the substantive issues, the feelings that arose during that interaction, particularly if it became escalated, also need to be addressed. It's what we call the sticky residues of conflict. Okay, sorry, you guys. So broadly speaking, there's 4 kinds of ways that people tend to respond. Passively, so people will avoid, walk away, change the subject, maybe just nod and say, yeah, I want this conversation done, right? And sometimes there's value in doing that, particularly if you feel like you're in a situation where it's scary or threatening and you just want to get out. Sometimes that kind of responding in that moment gives you the space to get out of there, but you will need to come back. being aggressive. And I'm sure we've all had those experiences with other people, but perhaps even with ourselves, where somebody really pushes hard and they're talking over top of us and they, my way or the highway, that kind of thing. You may also find yourself doing that, particularly if a conflict becomes escalated. That's not unusual for some of us to feel pulled. Passive aggressive, you know, those ones, the subtle digs, the gaslighting, that type of thing. All three of these, sometimes they'll have a place in a very temporary kind of way, but that's actually not the way we generally want to do it. We want to do it from what we call a more assertive perspective. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how to go about doing that in an assertive way. So here's the acronym that I promised you, the STLC system. So S meaning stop, T meaning think. Let's get my think up. You can imagine what L is for. If I've got an ear there, it means listen. And then T and C is for communicate. So what we want to, in thinking broadly about being in a conflict, we want to create opportunities to stop. So take some time out. One of my experiences, and it may well be yours, and feel free to throw things in the chat because I do have it open and Mary's helping me monitor, is that sometimes conflicts can go from 0 to 60 really fast. Or sometimes you find yourself in a conversation and then the next thing you know, you go, what the heck happened? I'm in the middle of a conflict. And you need some time to slow that down. So we call that taking the pause or the stop. So taking time out, we have to slow it down. And by slowing it down and creating space, that allows us, instead of knee jerking or being reactive, we can be more proactive. Now for the chat, let me ask you this. You've all had experiences. I'm sure you have had experiences where things were going really fast or they started to go really fast. What are some of the ways that you have tried or seen other people use to try to slow things down? What kinds of things have you seen? Put them in the chat. Oh, I got to get my everybody here. Come on now. You just don't want to talk and head at you guys. Come on, work with me. And this is also how we solve conflict. We get people to engage and we talk back and forth. Take a breather, right on, a few deep breaths. Oh, you know, breathing is so, well, you're going to think this is a funny thing for me to say, but breathing is really important. And one of the things that happens when people are in a conflict, particularly if it's getting tense, is their breathing becomes more and more shallow. And sometimes people actually even hold their breath. They're not aware they're doing it. This is a huge challenge because if you're breathing very shallowly, or you're starting to hold your breath, you're getting tense, it's going to affect your ability to think. Often feelings arise of anxiety, worry, anger. So breathing actually helps relax the body, which also then communicates to the mind, it's okay, we're in a safe place. Anybody else got anything they want to share as one of their techniques or what they do? You know, one of the things you can say is you could say to the other person, wow, okay, it's clear that this is really important and I want to have this conversation. Right now is not the right moment as I'm on my way to somewhere else, or I need some time to think about this. How about if we come back together at such and such a time? So you don't just push people off. You have to let them know that you're going to come back to it. And chances are, if you do that, they will create space for you. So looking at nature, staring out the window, absolutely. That can be a very calming thing, right? Very calming. Another thing you could do is suggest a change in venue. So you are going to have this conversation. You could say, hey, why don't we walk and talk? And there's a couple of advantages to doing that. Going out, walk, first of all, you have to get up and that changes your position. And once you change your position, your body starts to become less tense because you're going into other actions. And that also has an impact on your mind because now you start to get clear in your thoughts. You're no longer tense and tied up. You're doing that. And then if you're walking with somebody, you can monitor the amount of, because you tend to walk side by side, you can monitor the amount of eye contact you have with each other. So that if it's feeling tense, you can still be side by side, but maybe not looking as much, or you just vary it. So that could be a really putting myself in their shoes. Yeah, empathizing, right? What is this like for that person at this moment? And sometimes you are aware that, you know, you're in a conflict, but you could see from looking at the other person that they're really struggling. And perhaps what you need to do at this point is say, okay, let's slow this down. You seem to be upset about this. We got to make this a safe and positive place to have this conversation. These are lots of little tips. And anytime you want to run something past me, either here or, you know, just send me an email. I'm always happy to help you think through some options. And speaking of thinking, so we slow things down, create some space, release some of the tension we have. It's really important you think before you act. We can knee jerk. Somebody says something that we could perceive of as nasty or not something you want to hear, and you might want to go back, well, you've done this and you've done that. That's a reaction, and it could well be accurate what you're saying, but that's also going to likely provoke a defensive response, which means things can start to escalate away from what you wanted to focus on. So some of the tools one tool I'm going to share with you is to think about what are the sources of conflict. There's lots of reasons conflict happen. And sometimes when we're in a conflict, we're trying to solve the wrong problem. We've assessed that it's because of this, but actually it's because of something else. And then figuring out what your goals are. And then listening. Always listen before you say anything. One of the things you're going to hear me say again, and I hope it kind of sticks in your head as a mantra, is in conflict, one of the first things I'll ask you to do, I ask myself to do the same thing, is to, first of all, listen to what the other person is saying, work and make sure I'm listening to understand. We're going to come back to this again because, yep, active listening, exactly. We're going to come back to this again. Because that, I think, is probably the most critical skill that you have that will set you up well to manage conflict. So we're going to talk about these skills, the attending and following, and I'm going to give you my mantra of going for the yes, but we'll come back to that. And then once you've actively listened to somebody, which means you've shared your understanding with them, and they go, yeah, and they have a sense that you get it, that's called going for the yes. Now is your turn to speak about what you're concerned about, where you are on a particular issue. Again, we're going to talk about assertion in this case, not aggression, not being passive aggressive, but being assertive. So here's a tool that I find really useful to me when either I'm in a situation or I'm going to be approaching a situation where I suspect there will be disagreement or conflict. Or I'm helping other people. So sometimes I act as a mediator or a coach for people to help them think through how to respond. So this is called the circle of conflict. And I've also got a YouTube video link for you so that later on you can go take a look and get more detail. But there are a variety of sources for conflict. So conflict could be because of it's what we call a data conflict. There's information that's missing. What is it, and if you find, it's one of those questions about what is it we need to know here in order to address this question? Or there's misinformation. So somebody has shared something and they've said, well, this happened and it happened in this way. And you have other information that suggests it's different. But the two parties can actually try to discern what is accurate and what is not. Interpreting data. Many of you are researchers, right? You get either the numbers or the qualitative data, right? And you have to make an interpretation of it. Somebody else looking at that might interpret it differently. So knowing that it's a data conflict actually depersonalizes things. I mean, we're having this conflict not because you're a bad person, but because we have some lack of clarity about the data or about how we're interpreting it. And that's where we need to focus our attention. That is a very different feel to it. Then and others are language conflicts. And this isn't just about speaking different languages like English, French, Spanish, Farsi, although that's part of it, right? Because embedded in language are nuances that sometimes people who are not native speakers of that particular language may miss or may not understand. So that is part. But language conflicts can also reflect things. Are we defining things the same way? For example, one of the things that I see at Wayne State, but it's not just Wayne State, is we will use the same acronym, but it reflects two different things. So someone might say to me, oh, so the GEOC said this. And I go, GEOC, because that could either be the Graduate Employees Organizing Committee, or it could be the Gen Ed Oversight Committee. So we need to be clear about, what are we talking about? What is the definition of it? And also people differ in how they prefer to have a conversation. People have different kinds of preferences. Some folks are very direct. But others like to lay the groundwork a little bit more. I have a colleague who does a huge lead up before she gets to a question. And that used to be frustrating for me until I realized that that was her preference. That was how she was comfortable. And so now I'm much more comfortable in that environment. There are what we call the interest conflicts, which can be substantive. So you and I have different needs here. You need to have this done in order to get it to the provost. I need to have this done in order. I don't need to have, this is not a high priority for me right now. I need to do this instead. So there's those kinds of needs. Again, with these three, you can see we might be tempted, if we're not thinking about different sources, to personalize this, to say, it's just because you're being difficult, or I don't get it. There are the structure, oops, Sadati, what happened there? My goodness. Uh-oh. Hang on, guys. There we go. Sorry about that. Then there are the technologically based conflicts. There are the structural conflicts, which is the situation is set up for you two to conflict. We see this in workplaces. You may well see it in your lab or in your research teams or in your classes, where people might, there might be different roles that people are playing, but those roles are conflicting with each other. So it's not the people themselves that are at issue, it's the fact that the roles overlap, or they're overloaded, or they conflict. So what I think my job is, and what you think your job is, and they overlap, and you and I are having a conflict, and I need to think about, is this kind of like, does this feel familiar to me? Is this a repeating pattern? Because often that suggests it's been because the situation is set up that way. And I'm not saying set up necessarily in terms of intentionally doing it to keep us occupied, although that could be one of the reasons. Unequal power and authority, which many of you might feel, for example, if you're talking to your advisor, or your dissertation advisor, or a senior faculty member, or something like that. That's an unequal power situation. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a conflictual one, but if you're trying to come to a decision and they have more influence on that than you do, then there needs to be a discussion about how we do that. For example, authorship. Let's think about authorship. You have to figure out together, and preferably beforehand, what the order of authorship is going to be. And sometimes people default to the fact that the most senior person goes in. Well, that's disciplinary based. But again, looking at what's causing this conflict, is it the way it's set up? Is it the way our roles are defined? That if we clarified our roles, watch the conflict disappear. I'm going to skip over values and come back to that one, because that's a big, huge piece. One is the relationship one. And hold on a sec, something's blocking my vision. Relationship conflicts. And often people assume a conflict they're having with people is based in the relationship. These ones are more characterized. There's been a pattern, a troubled past history between you, or you see it with other people. They're really strong emotions. People are misperceiving all over the place. There's a lot of defensive reactions. It suggests that the source is grounded in, if there's a pattern and it's not unfamiliar to you with this person, potentially it's in the relationship, but it could also have to do with the structure. If it only happens within certain circumstances, like while you're in the lab, but outside of that, you guys are fine, that might suggest to you a different one. So understanding what the source is then helps you come up with ideas about how you might want to deal with it. If it is really grounded in a problematic relationship where there is a long history, the resolutions become very different than, say, for example, in a data conflict. A data conflict, if you guys get clear, we have different, we're missing information. Then you figure out together what information you need and how you're going to get it and how you're going to talk about it. So there's different kinds of strategies. And also the emotional connection, right? If you know it's a data conflict or an interest conflict, emotionally you're calmer, right? And we talked about ways to pause and to think clearly. That will be true. Now, value conflicts, we can't lose sight of these ones. And often people will assume too, there's a value conflict. If we disagree, it's because we have different worldviews and beliefs. That may well be true. And we're a very diverse campus. We encourage that. We want to have multiple perspectives. We want to have intellectual diversity. We want to have all of that. And sometimes people are coming at it from different value perspectives. And my perspective is values aren't negotiable. We don't convince people not to have those values, just like I don't want to be convinced not to have mine. I make that decision. But we can still work together if we understand where people are coming from and what their values are. So there's an interesting conversation to be had about the things that each of us value, what's important to us, what perspective we bring. And many times in conflict, people don't even think to have that kind of conversation. And I know that probably feels really overwhelming to you. Oh, and somebody mentioned virtual versus face-to-face. Okay, yep. Virtual situations face-to-face. So one of the challenges with virtual is you don't get the full nonverbal presence of people. Although Zoom and Zoom and Teams are helping us a little bit with that, but you don't always get the same. And people have different comfort levels in those different environments too, right? So those can actually complicate all of this. Yeah, I'm making your lives easier, right? I'm telling you how complicated it is. But there are things that you can do and you can develop that can increase the chances that when you are in conflict with people, it can go better than maybe what it has been before. So here are the core skills: listening, assertion, so not being passive aggressive, not being aggressive, not being assertion, and I'll define what those are. Problem solving, which many of you already know the process of problem solving. So what I'm going to talk about more is listening and assertion. And then those are actually put together in a conflict management mode. In addition to developing these skills, the other thing you need to develop is to know when to lead with each of these skills. So I'm going to show you a little graphic that I've always found helpful, and hopefully you'll find it helpful too. Again, remember, if there's anything time you want me to stop, throw it in the chat. I am keeping an eye on it. And I'm also aware it's 3:30, so. One of the ways I like to think about it, and it came up in some of your comments when you were saying, what are the signs that you know you're in conflict? There was emotion, there was tension, there was frustration, there was changes in body, language, that type of stuff. What we know is that when we get into conflict and other people get into conflict, our energy level gets up. And we also know that we need energy to engage with somebody else, because if we don't have the energy for it, we don't engage at all. So I like thinking about this as the emotional level, the emotional energy level that people have. So for example, in this first one, if you have a moderate amount of energy, emotional energy, and you need that in order to engage, if you don't have that energy, you're not going to engage. And the other person is all full up. They got a lot. It's all there. Which of those 4 skills would you lead with? Listening, assertion, conflict management, or problem solving? Which one of those skills would you lead with? Just, you can put it in the chat. And I got to go back to everything because it shows up Mary. Assertion, okay. Anybody else? Now remember, it's this person, it's the other person who is full up. Assertion, listening. Yeah. And because we're running out of time, because we're running close on time, I want to make sure it's actually listening, right? So you've got enough energy to stay engaged, but you're not being overwhelmed by the energy that you have. The other person has a lot. They've got a lot in their mind. They got to say things. Your best skill is to lead with active listening to them. Now, assertion comes in though when you're the one who's got a lot of full up energy and the other person is feeling more moderate, more grounded, more centered, just like you were in the listening scheme. Now, when the two of you are all wound up, which is often what happens in conflict, this is where conflict management comes in. And this is where we do a combination of listening and assertion to work with the emotional energy and get information shared that isn't currently available. And then the level enough that people now become able to problem solve and address the issues in front of them. So let me go overview listening. Somebody said here, let me just throw it up here because you guys already know a lot of this stuff. There are three broad types of listening. One is what we call competitive or combative listening. And each of us has probably done this, where somebody's talking and in our mind, we're going, just wait till he's done. Just wait till she's done. I'm going to go after that point. I'm going to go. Your focus is more on what you can learn. It's all about you, and you're pretending to pay attention. There could be what we call the attentive listening, which is you do want to hear the other person's perspective, but you assume that you understand. So the other person doesn't know what you understand. And sometimes we do this. Well, someone will be talking to us and we actually do understand, but what we say to them is, I understand, but they don't know what it is that you understand. You have to tell them what it is that you think you understand, and that gives them an opportunity to correct if need be. And so that's active and reflective listening. And one of the things I say in all of my presentations that I do is if you only have room in your social skills repertoire for one skill, let it be active listening. And I'm going to go on and say why that is. So, well, let me ask you, why is active listening good? What happens when you actively listen to someone else? Use the chat, throw out some ideas here. What does active listening, why does it work? What does it create? What comes out of that? What do you get? What does the other person get? Why is active listening a good thing? Respect. Oh yeah, people feel like if I communicate back to you, it sounds like this is the challenge for you and you're frustrated by that. You're like, whoa, somebody's listening to me. When you're actively listening, you're actually devoted to the other person. You're really listening to what they have to say. Prevents making assumptions. Absolutely. You're getting a chance to check out your understanding and also get some information. It's a good communication system. Absolutely. And it shows that you care. Oh yeah, that is really powerful. And particularly in a conflict, if things are very strong, people are starting to feel like you're the enemy, you're my opposition, but you take the time and focus and really listen to what they have to say, not for competitive reasons, but because you really want to understand, because there's something you don't understand and you need to understand that, and you will get your opportunity to then share that back. Good job, you guys. So just to overview, to show that you know exactly what you're talking about, it helps clear up misunderstanding because you're getting information. It also helps identify areas that you disagree on, and also though areas you agree on. And I imagine each of you has had the experience where you're in a conflict or a disagreement or an argument or whatever with somebody, and then as you progress, you realize, wait a minute, we're not actually disagreeing on this at all. You ever had that experience? Yeah. But sometimes we didn't catch on to it early enough, and now we've got to deal with escalated because we've said some things or they've said some things. So now that's an escalated conflict. Listening closely to somebody else, or if you've ever been listened closely to, if someone has ever actively listened to you, it often helps you clarify your own thoughts. Often when we're in conflict, we're not always clear what's important to us, but in conversation with somebody else, as they work to understand, it's like it opens up space for us to get clear for ourselves. And the caring feature, which was identified in the screen, creates good feelings. One of the most sincere forms of respect is actively listening. It builds rapport. People are more willing to stick with you through this challenging conversation if they feel you're active, if you feel you're listening to them. And it actually has a self-reflective thing on you, in that when you're actively listening to somebody else, you can't be doing anything else. You cannot be reading a paper. You cannot be playing on social media. You cannot. If you're really listening to somebody else, because you're listening to understand, your focus is all on them, which means you're not feeding that little voice in the back of your head that says, just wait, just wait, just wait, or I've got to do this, or I've got to do that. It actually cools you out. It helps calm you down. So not only does it help calm them down, it actually helps calm you down. Yep. And somebody said it helps you understand the perspective of the other person. Absolutely. That's information you don't have. I'm not going to go to breakout because we're running with. So let me overview the sets of skills that are involved with this. There are the attending skills. So how is it we let people know that we're listening to them? And a big way we let people know is through our posture, our body language, being focused on them, creating. So what I do an exercise sometime, which we have people be the worst listeners they've been and the best listeners they've been. And I watch the room when the worst listeners are doing what they're doing, and they're turning their bodies away, they're focusing on their phones, they're interrupting the person, they're talking over top of them. Everything they're doing is communicating, I'm not following you, right? But good listeners, when somebody is being the best listener they've ever been, their posture is often leaning forward. They make eye contact, but they don't stare or be aggressive. There's that kind of movement. They try to minimize their actions, which I'm not exactly doing because I'm moving with my actions, so it's not distracting. They make sure they're in a quiet environment. Then there are the set of skills that are the following skills. All of those good things you want to get out of active listening, the information, the understanding of perspective, you need to create the space for the speaker to actually be able to talk. So inviting them in, like door opening, saying, tell me more. The minimal encouragers, these are what we call the grunts and groans of communication. If you've ever been on the phone with somebody and you don't have visual and you're talking or they're talking, you're often doing things like, okay, oh, all of those things you do that are encouraging people to keep going. Use judicious use of questions, have them be infrequent, because you've questioned somebody a lot, they're losing their train of thought, they're now answering your questions and you're not really hearing them. And then what we call the attentive silence, which is when you have all the attending features and you're quiet and you're listening to them. That says to people you're available. They convey that you're interested and they prompt the other person to keep talking. Here is the content. This is where you actually get to show them what you understand. So you reflect back. This is your accuracy check. You're saying back to somebody, like reflecting the content. So they've talked to you about some stuff. One of the ways you can communicate what you heard is by paraphrasing what they said. Don't parrot, which is they said, I'm really angry that Mary did that to me. And your response is, you're really angry Mary did that to you. That's parroting and they're going to be annoyed. But putting things in your own words, like saying, oh, when Mary did this, and they told you what Mary did, you felt frustrated by that. And you're asking them as a question. So and you can be checking your perceptions. It sounds like you wish this had happened differently, or it sounds like you feel that what I'm doing right now is potentially interfering with this thing that you want. And I'm asking it as a question. And then they can come back and say, if they say yes, then they know that I understand them. And now I have more information. You can reflect the feelings. Like I started off by saying, you seem really upset about that. Somebody talked about early on in the Mentimeter, recognizing the frustration on someone's face or whatever. Reflect the meaning. So when somebody says, okay, so you felt frustrated when I didn't turn this item in on the time that we agreed, and you felt that meant that I wasn't doing my work, that I wasn't contributing to the project the way I felt it should. So I've done some interpretation there. I put the content and the feeling together, and I'm asking them, is that the interpretation? Summarizing is a wonderful skill, absolutely wonderful. When you're all wound up or they're all wound up, a lot of stuff is coming out, right? Summarizing and saying, okay, hold on a moment. There's a lot of material there. Let me just summarize what I think I've heard you say. I heard you say, I'm going to say there's three things. You talked about needing to get this done by a certain time. You talked about this, and is that accurate? Did I capture that? That helps the other person too, because they've got a lot of stuff going on. Clarifying. I want to make sure I understand what you said. I often will use the phrase, now, am I correct in assuming, is my assumption correct that this is what is supposed to happen? So I'm clarifying that. So I'm working to understand. Validation. Yep, absolutely. Validation. These behaviors capture and verify content. So that when you do that, you're going for what we call the yes. So by sharing your perceptions, by checking meaning, by checking feeling, you're asking them. So it sounds like, or this and this happened, and you had that feeling about that. Is that right? Or just going up at the end of a sentence like that is communicating. And if you get a yes, where they say, yeah, or right, yeah, that now says that their energy has come down, and now is your opportunity to assert. Sometimes they will say no. And what does that suggest to you? What do you need to do if they say no? That's not it. What do you need to do? Anybody want to throw something in the chat? Okay, I'll give you a hint. You have to go back to listening. Do those door openers. Say, okay, well, tell me more. Tell me what I'm missing. Clarify again. Absolutely. But let's say they've said yes. So you've got going for the yes. Now it's your turn to speak. Assertion versus aggression and passivity is respectfully expressing your thoughts and feelings, clearly expressing your thoughts and feelings to another, with the purpose that you know that information is important to them because you want to influence what they're ultimately going to do. It's speaking up for your interests and needs, what you care about, what's important to you in this moment, in a way that doesn't interfere or infringe. So this doesn't involve interrupting somebody. This doesn't involve talking over top of them. This doesn't involve walking away from them, or saying, I don't care what you want. That's not an assertive action, because you're not going to be able to get the information you need and be able to come up with a solution. So we have a formula. How are we doing, Mary? Okay, 15 minutes. We have a formula. It's the I feel when because. So you identify your feeling, but sometimes it's kind of hard when you're in these moments, right? So that may be where that pause comes in, and take a deep breath and figure out, I feel frustrated. A concrete description of the behavior that's bothering you, or the things that's missing that's bothering you. People will often tend to do, I feel frustrated because you're being selfish. You're being a jerk. That's not a concrete description of behavior. A concrete description of behavior by when you said that we agreed that this would be turned in by 5 o'clock yesterday, and it wasn't. That's very descriptive, very specific. That's something someone can focus on. And then describing what the impact was of that. And it didn't allow me enough time to be able to do my contribution to the project. And your tone and the way you talk about this is really important. Being calm, being clear. And if you're struggling with that and you're feeling you can't do that, then that's where you need to take a pause and say, okay, let's take a break and come back and talk about this. Here's an example. You could say, Susan, you'd better start making the meetings on time, or there's going to be a serious problem. I'm sick and tired of you waltzing in here whenever you feel like it. You have a bad attitude, and it's causing a lot of problems around here. How do you think someone's going to react to that? Are they going to go, oh, tell me more about that? Probably not. Probably they're going to push back on you, and it's going to go like this. Also, it may have been directed at you, and you're like, okay, what do I do with that? What do you mean? What is it that I've done that's making you sick and tired? What it's all my fault. So I'll go into defensive mode. If I'm not careful, I'll go into defensive mode. However, we've all been trained well in conflict management, so I know I need to listen. But here we're practicing assertion. Here's an alternative way it could be done. Susan, when you came in late to our meeting, describe the behavior. I feel frustrated, my feeling, because it is a serious impact in keeping us on agenda, on track. Right? And again, my tone has to be calm, professional. Another way, I've noticed that you've been coming to meetings late. Description of behavior. I'm confused. So that's my feeling, because I know you're excited about the project we're working on. Could you help me understand what's been keeping you from making it on time? Those two expressions are totally different than the first example I gave you, right? Yep, same vibe. Exactly. Yeah, the other things were negative, right? We don't have time to do this one, but but you're going to have this PowerPoint, and I'm always happy to talk to people. So you do your assertion. You're laid out the person, what you see as the issue, what the specific behavior is, what the feeling you have on, and what the impact is. You may also want to be requesting a very specific change. This is called giving feedback, right? So once you've done that, I feel, because whichever order you want to do that in, you pause for discussion. The other person will have a response to that. Let them share their perspective. They may give an explanation. This is when you're in listening mode again, right? Okay. And once you kind of get to that place about, okay, now we know what we're talking about, the description of what you would like to be different. So in the example I gave about turning the paper in, or you're part of the project in yesterday, what I would like is that when we agree to a timeline, we stick to it. And if we can't, or if you or I can't, then let's come up with a way that we would let each other know as soon as possible, so we can make whatever changes we have to. I would like, and describing, and I just described the concrete, tangible outcomes. So you can see, if you're getting to this point, now the two of you are moving into a problem solving. Now, one of the things you'll want to know about, because I've mentioned it a couple of times, is it doesn't always go as smoothly as the model suggests. So what happens when people get defensive, or what happens when you get defensive? This is a combination of listening and assertion. So you've opened the door, you want to hear what that other person has to say. And chances are, if you're in a conflict, they've got a number of things they want to say. So you're going to be in reflective listening mode. That will often drop their defensiveness, their emotional energy, and then you can be assertive. You can now add your information in. Sometimes it moves smoothly from there. Sometimes they shoot back up again. When somebody's emotional energy goes up, they become defensive, move into listening mode. So you continue to try to do that listening back and listening with them to get reduction in the emotional energy. And you can see it in their body. When they say the yes, now it's your turn to do the assertion. Do not be surprised if you have to go through back and forth on this a few times. I am not saying also that you have to stay in this loop. If it just keeps, every time you reflectively listen and then you move to assert, they go up again, and then it keeps happening, you got to change your goal in that case. This is not going to be a conversation that's going to happen right now. So you need to close up the conversation and move on from there and say, you know what, there's a lot, we've got a lot of information here, and you've shared a lot. And there's things that clearly we need to continue talking about. I think we need to take a break. I need to take a break, own it. I need to take the break. And so let's either go for a walk, or can we come back and let's come back and talk about this? Not can we, let's come back and talk about it. So this is the whole, there it is in words, how you go about doing that. Now, one thing I'm going to leave you with, because it's 10 minutes too, here's your model again. Stop, think, listen, communicate. And here's some tips I'm going to leave you with. Be clear about what outcome you want. When you go into this situation with somebody, and sometimes you have a choice, but sometimes it's delivered to you. What do you want to have happen here? What outcome do you want? Is the relationship, often if these are people you're working with, in class with, you're going to be seeing, or your advisor, you're going to be seeing them again and again and again. Therefore, you want to make sure that whatever you do, that the relationship will could be constructive. So that becomes one of your goals. It doesn't mean you have to suck it up and not be assertive, Because if you're not feeling you can be heard, if you're not feeling that you can share what you need to share, that's going to undercut the relationship too. So being as clear as you can about what do you want to accomplish out of this conversation. Watch your assumptions. Somebody used that word, assuming, right? Active listening allows us to check out some of that. Doing reality checks. Sometimes if you know you're going to be walking into a situation that could be particularly challenging, you may want to, kind of talk to somebody else prior to that and say, look, I'm approaching this situation. This is what I've seen. I need a reality check. Focus always on the situation, the behavior, not on the person. Conflicts escalate very rapidly when you attack the person, right? And you'd feel the same way if you were being attacked as a person. You're sloppy, you're lazy, you don't do your work, people will be defensive. And then all hope of having a conversation and solving the issues has been delayed. Your tone and words are really important, really important. You can change the meaning of a word by the tone of your voice. So if I were to say to somebody, that makes sense to me. What you suggested this, that makes sense to me. Versus, well, that makes sense to me. Those are same words, but different meaning. Avoid absolutes. Always avoid absolutes. Never and always. You always do that. You never do that. Oh, don't do that. Because then that opens up the whole thing about, what do you mean I never do that? Now you're off track. Now the issues you were talking about. Avoid using you a lot. You do this, you do that. Speak for yourself. I feel frustrated when this happened and your response was this. I feel frustrated. Avoid the shoulds. You should be doing this. You shouldn't be doing that. You should. People don't like that. We call it, you shouldn't be shoulding on other people. And being assertive versus aggressive. And getting clear for yourself what that is. And if you find yourself moving into being aggressive, you need to close out that conversation and step away. You need that pause. You need to stop. So that is it in a nutshell. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we have a few minutes. And if anybody wants to come on screen or put something in the chat. Oh, yeah, Sakina, who's been a very active participant. Thank you, Sakina. Says meditation helps prior to difficult conversation for them. Yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of grounding exercises people do. So taking a deep breath, meditating, maybe going for a walk before you see them, talking to a close friend, all of those kinds of things. Getting yourself in a space whenever possible so that you can feel grounded and centered. How about any questions, comments? Have you heard this all before? Any suggestions you have for our colleagues here about what you found has worked well for you in having difficult conversations or conflicts with others? Okay, Emma, I think going into conversation, being open-minded about the possibility that I might be wrong. Yeah, I know, right? Like, I try to walk in with the idea that I don't know everything. I have some ideas, but I don't know everything. And that's another thing is I might have some ideas, but I need to be cognizant that I have those, because if I'm not aware that I do, I'm only going to be looking for information that confirms them. And I'm not going to hear the information that challenges them. And that has a lot to do with how our minds function and the schemas we walk into. So being cognizant that you will tend to hear things if it fits with what you believe and not hear things if it doesn't. And the cool thing about human beings is once we're aware that we can get caught in that, we can stop it. Oh, great. Somebody likes the STLC model. Yeah, having that acronym I find helpful for me. Something I can grab at like that and say, remember, Loraleigh, stop, slow it down. And while I've professionally been doing this work for years, I have conflicts. I get anxious about them. Sometimes I don't do very well in them. And when I'm at my best, they go actually quite well. Anything else from anybody?
Hello.
Hey there. Hi.
Um, um, Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this section very well.
Mhm.
Okay, so I think I'm guilty of one which has to do with the active listening. Sometimes whenever someone is talking and I pretty much don't understand what the person is talking about,
Mhm.
I kind of pretend or assume I actually understand by just nodding my head. But deep down, I actually know I really don't understand what the person is actually talking about. So in that kind of situation, what do you advise I kind of do in that situation?
What's really cool is that you're aware that you do that. And so
Actually,
keeping that in your mind, and when you find yourself saying, I understand, or just nodding like I just did, but those nods actually keep you talking too, right? Is that when you hear yourself saying, yeah, I understand, or they're finished talking and you're like, how do they know I know what they understand? Fill in that gap. This is what I think I understand, or this is what I think I heard you say. Or it sounds like, whatever turns of phrases that work for you. But I'm impressed that you know that about yourself, because I think it will change then how you are with other people, because you'll be aware, oh, I got to what, this is something I tend to get, I think I understand, and it may well be that you actually do understand very well. They just don't know what it is you understand. And when you share with them what you think you know, that gives them the opportunity to say yes. And then that forms that connection, or no, that's not it. And then you can open it up again. Does that help?
oh yes, yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome. Somebody has in the chat, do you have any advice for working through conflict with people who have ADD, ADHD, as they sometimes go from 0 to 60 quickly? Many of my clients have ADD. I think with anybody who moves that fast, then you want to try to do things to slow it down. So actually, I found a good summary statement is helpful there. I said, whoa, there's a lot of information there. I want to take a moment and just tell you what I've heard you say, or share with you what I think I've heard you say, so that we can do that. I think sometimes get changing the venue and a different action. So going out for a walk, because that requires occupying cognitively your body to get that done, so that that can be helpful. I also think sometimes you can say things like, okay, I know you got a lot to say right now. How about let's both of us just breathe, because there's a lot going on here. Let's just take a moment. I need you to slow down for me, because I need to make sure I understand. I'm hearing everything you're telling me, and there's so much information you're sharing. I need to do it. Watch your tone on that one, right? Like, we don't want to do that. But those are some thoughts. But you know what? You've raised an interesting question to me. And I'm going to do some looking up on what some of the recommendations are coming from some of the folks in my field about that. Thank you. Oh yeah, and having the energy to engage is important. Absolutely. Listen, if you're kind of like, it's coming at you and you're like, I really don't have the energy to do this. Like, if someone really comes at me with a big issue at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm somebody who's up at 5 o'clock in the morning. 5 o'clock in the afternoon or later is not my best time for taking on complex, detailed conversations. I need to own that and to say, this is clearly important, and I want to talk about this because I care about this. The relationship, whatever it is that the issues are, but right now I can't, I don't have the energy to engage with you, and you deserve that. So can we come back at another time? And if you've been having this conversation like over time and you guys get tired, that's a perfectly legitimate time. Wow, we've covered a lot of territory, and summarizing what that was, I could use a break. How about you? Right. So, and the same with active listening. Anytime, even if you're not in a conflict, actively listening to other people is always a good thing, because it builds relationships, right? And you get to know them better. It also takes energy though, doesn't it? Because I'm focused on you. I'm processing the content. I'm processing the feelings. I'm doing all that. That is exhausting work. And I know it is exhausting. It's meaningful work, but it's exhausting. And so if you really haven't got the time to listen, like say somebody comes into your office and says, oh, this happened and blah, blah, blah. And you've got this deadline and you've got like 15 minutes to get to it. And I've said to people, clearly this is important, what we need to talk about. And I want to hear you because you're important to me. But right now, I don't use the word but because that dismisses everything I said before. And right now, I need to finish this up. Could you go grab a coffee, or can you wait for me for about 15 minutes? Or could we talk about this tomorrow morning? Sometimes when you do that, then people might come back and say, no, it has to be done now. And sometimes it does. Sometimes you've just been hit with a big issue that needs to be resolved. One of the questions I'll ask people, particularly if I'm feeling I've got a number of things and somebody comes in and says, can I talk? They'll say, most of the time they'll say, can I talk to you? Do you have time? And if you really don't have time, be honest about that. You say, well, but what I often say is, how urgent is it that you talk to me now? If it's really urgent, if we can't talk about it later, it has to be done now, then let me just wrap this up and let's talk. And most of the time people will say, oh no, not right now, but I would like to talk to you. Okay, let's set up a time for us to get together. So that helps. Got a nice comment. Oh, okay, Emma's got some info for us. She acknowledges that person with ADHD. My very biased opinion would be to try to validate that they're feeling many things at once. Nice. Summary, perception check. Right on. Sometimes I'll continue to speak quickly because I'm concerned they don't understand. Oh, yeah. But also important to remember that everyone is different and no one is defined. Right. Yeah. And the fact that be in that conversation with somebody, be there, be present, no matter what their communication preferences are, be present with them. Because as we talked about with active listening, you will learn things that you did not know. And those could be really critical to helping figure out what's going on. And then the other thing is, as Emma points out here, it's useful for the other person because it allows them to get things out, but also potentially then to slow it down a little bit. And they know that you're there and that you care enough to be there. And that fundamental relationship building will put you in good stead when you start having disagreements. And that sounds like a good way to wrap up, doesn't it, Mary?
It's perfect, Loraleigh. You're such a gifted communicator. You wrapped it all up so nicely. Well, thank you so much. We're at 4:05, and I know a lot of you folks have other commitments this afternoon, so we will close out. But before we do, I want to let you know about some upcoming graduate school events. Next week, Tuesday, March 28th, we have Meet the Dean at Tony V's. It's on Cass Avenue. It's in between the Academic Administration Building and Carhart and I-94. There's flags and signs outside, so it's pretty well marked. You'll get a chance to meet grad school dean Amanda Bryant Friedrich, and you will be able to network with other grad students, and we'll have some very tasty food and beverages there. We have another event on Tuesday, April 4th as part of our professional development seminar series. It is entitled Mentorship Planning 101, and that is with Professor Matt Allen. He is the chair of the Department of Chemistry. That's on Zoom. Look for your emails for more information, but that is coming up on Tuesday, April 4th at 3 p.m. So we will wrap it up, and thank you all for being here. It's great to see everybody. A wonderful presentation as always, Loraleigh. Lots of useful information to think about and use for our next conflict situation, which for many of us might be right around the corner. So,
yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, thank you, everybody, for being such a graceful and attentive audience. I really appreciate it. I feel cared for. Thank you.
And you should feel appreciated.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye. Have a good rest of your day.